Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for the second panel. You will have heard a lot about the issues, obviously, that smaller venues are facing and the lack of opportunity for artists to perform at smaller venues as a consequence of that. I mean, do you, obviously you're very, as an operator of larger venues, you're in a very different position, particularly, I'll start with you, Lucy, with the Albert Hall, obviously one of London's largest and most prestigious venues. But do you, I mean, but from your perspective, do you share the sense of concern that people operators of smaller venues have, and people who work across the industry, that actually this is for music in particular, for live music, this is one ecosystem, and actually if there's problems in one area of it, ultimately it can be bad for everyone else as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a very privileged position because the Royal Albert Hall is obviously an iconic venue, and we're coming up for our 150th birthday. So, and we're very busy. We'll have 400 shows on our main stage this year, but we do 1,000 other performances in peripheral spaces. So we do have a secondary performance space that holds 300 people standing, and we've done that so that we can give access to younger artists who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to perform at the Royal Albert Hall. We do it for accessible ticket prices, and we can do it because we're able to financially, but we don't make any money from doing those smaller gigs, and we need the young artists to be coming through so they can perform on our main stage, and we do see a lack of young artists coming through to perform at the Royal Albert Hall, and it is of a major concern. So if we're losing some of those grassroots venues, it's a huge worry. But then, even taking a step back from that, if we're losing music education, with the new EBAC, where you don't actually even have to take a creative subject as part of your GCSE anymore, which is actually of a huge concern to us and quite a shocking decision. If it right at the start, even before you get to the grassroots venues, if people aren't engaging with music and we're not educating them, how are we possibly going to get to the dizzy heights of performing at somewhere like the Royal Albert Hall?
Yeah, I understand that, but I think do you see if there's a decline in the amount of performing space and artists aren't able to develop themselves and their careers in the way they would like, and do you start to see a knock-on for larger venues where they're not? You're seeing fewer new acts looking to perform at big stages because the pipeline of those acts coming through is not there in the way that it was before.
Definitely. So we've had to undertake initiatives to try and encourage younger artists to perform because they're just not coming through in the same way as they used to. So it definitely impacts. Yeah.
Michele, quite interested in your perspective on this issue about the loss of performance space, and do you agree with what you've heard so far this afternoon?
Yeah, totally. We're in a position that we do have small venues and a large venue, and seeing the progression through both. We as a business understand that shows that we put on in our smaller venues are loss leaders, and the plan then is obviously we try and get that smaller show up to the medium and then up to the larger venues. But we're not really seeing the young emerging artists like we have done in the past, and it can lead to our shows in our larger venues being a little bit more stagnant. We have benefited from revival tours where bands that have actually previously said that's it, we're done, have come back and said actually we're going to do another tour. So we're kind of picking up from that, but where do we go in the future? Where are those new artists coming from to go to those larger venues?
Yeah. Tom, obviously, UK Music has a perspective across the industry. Do you feel there are parts of the country which are doing better than others, or is this a problem that affects everywhere?
Sure. I mean, the overall picture of live music industry as a whole is actually one of very sustained growth. I think in the context, something like 29.1 million people attended live music events across the board last year. The live music industry itself contributes 1 billion to around 1 billion to the economy. So actually, we do have a very strong, vibrant music industry, live music industry in the UK. I think what you are having trouble with, though, are legislative issues and some of the issues which we had in this session earlier and just been articulated. I think the picture, you're right in saying, is certainly mixed around the country. Some of the figures that we have in some of the regions show some areas of certainly where there is high concentration of activity, particularly in the south, but then there's areas perhaps in the north where we can be doing more, certainly if you look back at some of our historic figures.
We heard in the previous panel about the idea of a sort of ticket tax to create a music fund to support venues. Is that something that you would support? I've asked all the members of the panel.
to support smaller venues, did you say, or all venues?
Well, it's the way it was described sounded like it's a tax on all tickets that are sold. So obviously it's slightly redistributive because bigger venues would be making a bigger contribution to the pot, but it sounded like the money in the pot was going to be going more to the smaller venues. Is that something the Albert Hall would support?
I think there needs to be something to support smaller venues. I'm not sure a tax on that would impact on the larger venues. I mean, we're a charity and we don't have any funding at all, any government funding. So, and it costs us £6 million just to maintain our Grade 1 listed building every year. So, I wouldn't necessarily be supportive of taking it off us to give to the smaller, but I do think there's a need for financial support for those smaller venues.
Yeah. Michele?
Yeah, same. I think there is a lot of taxes and payments that larger venues and small are expected to pay. One thing that we didn't really go into in the first panel is the fact that a lot of live music venues, because live music doesn't sustain the bills, do actually put on other events, so our nightclubs, which are then having to pay late night levy taxes, pay into bids. So to put on top of that we'd pay, an extra 3% on ticket revenue is, would make our margins smaller and, could impact on the business.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'd have to say that we're very strongly in support of working together as an ecosystem. So UK Music itself brings together all of these organisations and we can collaborate together. I think what you have seen in recent years with the formation of the Music Venue Trust is actually having a very strong voice for grassroots music venues. And I think that that's definitely helps with the work that we've been doing with them to kind of support them in this campaigning work.
Yeah. I mean, do you believe that it's the issues here are not to do with a lack of demand, the lack of interest or appetite from the public in going to watch live music events, but just the rising costs that are associated with running a venue? Is that where you think the problem lies?
I'd say it's the cost and also, I say, the legislation. So we've obviously talked a bit about agent of change already and planning. That has got particular solutions in place and we hope to make some further progress there. But I think licensing generally is still a problem. All it takes is one or two neighbours in a resident to put in a complaint, even about an existing venue, let alone a new build or development in that regard, and that can then threaten a venue's licence. So I think that's something, although we've had reforms in that area, what we don't have with the Licensing Act is a very pernicious piece of legislation. So I think it's not just the cost, although I do agree that that's a significant barrier. I think you've got to look at a lot of the legislative framework too and get that right. So it's great to have achieved what we have done on planning but there is more we can do in other areas too, I think.
Yeah, and I'm going to come on to more to talk about agent of change in a moment. But before we move on to that, I mean, Lucy, I wanted to ask you, did you, looking at the way London in particular, but this could affect the whole country, is served by major venues, do you feel that we have enough capacity? Is there scope for additional large venues in London? Do you feel that, from the perspective of a venue like the Albert Hall, there is, far more demand than you can meet?
Yeah, we're in a very fortunate and unique position, but I mean, we have some big venues. We have the O2, we have Wembley, but then we have Hammersmith Apollo, Shepherd's Bush Empire. There are a lot in London, and then we have talk of the new Simon Rattle Concert Hall, and then of course at MSG Sphere. Now that is actually fantastic, and we met with them last week in New York, and it's quite a different proposition to the other venues. So I think if something comes online which is different, and it's all going to be about virtual reality and innovative ways of doing performances as opposed to kind of the more traditional format. But I do think a venue like that will have impact on places like the O2 Arena and Wembley Arena. So we do need to be careful about saturating the market in London and perhaps incentivise people to do things regionally more and incentivise people to tour regionally as well.
Yeah. I mean, Michele, do you feel there is a lack of big performance space in this country, or do you feel we're meeting the demand from the perspective of the venues that you work with?
I think, it is a difficult balance. So obviously when a tour is booked, it's booked in mind with where that tour is going to go. If you start putting larger venues in different regions, it can take away from also going a normal route maybe, but then it also keeps the venues competitive. We don't want our industry to become stagnant and stuck in their ways. There is definitely a complete movement in terms of was discussed earlier about the pub trade. That still feeds into live music, where we want to be able to offer our customers good quality products as well, not just a warm beer and sticky floors. That's, it's not acceptable anymore. And if you don't have that competitiveness within the industry, then that's where it will decline. So I think it is definitely a balance that's needed.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to come to Josie next. Yeah.
We touched on agent of change in the first panel, but I was interested to know what each of you think licensing and planning authorities could do more to protect and help music venues thrive of all sizes. Do you want to kick off, Tom?
I mean, one area that we have explored a bit, which is actually, again, about collaborative working, is London itself has something called a music board, which actually brings together a lot of the local actors. It's probably very similar to maybe the work that you're doing in Cardiff. It might manifest in something like that. But it's really helpful to get the planning and licensing authorities, those kind of people there in control of the decision-making process, to actually work with the industry and be collaborating in that regard. So we've seen actually some great success in London with the music board that's taking place there. Again, what's happening in other areas of the city regions, we're working closely with Steve Rotherham in Liverpool. He's developing plans there to set up a music board. We're also talking a lot to the mayors in Greater Manchester and also in Sheffield City region too. So I think there's a role to be had there, I think, in terms of local leaders bringing those kind of the systems together, because there is so much an overlap between the two. And essentially, agent of change is preempting problems further down the line in the licensing system. It's almost like taking one step forward before a building before you've got the actual problem. It's trying to sort of bring that together. So that kind of collaboration does need to work across, I think, the board. And I think like what you can do with more greater devolution of powers within England is actually maybe create structures where they can be more enhanced together. I mean, there has been some talk about bringing actually the planning and licensing decision-making process much more closely together and actually being one of the same say, committee. I mean, that would obviously be quite a radical change and would take some time to bed in, but certainly the principle is a good one and one that is probably worth looking into a bit more.
Thank you. Lucy?
I say the agent of change has been fantastic, and just to have common sense applied to that kind of thing is a really brilliant step forward. I think for us, we were chatting about this the other day, and making venues a destination, somewhere like the South Bank that used to be kind of the dead end of nowhere, and now look how much it has thrived and how it benefits tourism, and it's a real social and cultural hub. And we would have those ambitions at the Royal Albert Hall, and we would love to do something similar, but I imagine that we would come up against planning or difficulties or restraints. So some support when we want to improve an area in that way to make it more of a hub, really, I would suggest.
Thank you. Michele?
I suppose mine kind of falls more into licensing, where, because we have venues in various different areas of the country, seeing the difference between the attitudes of local authorities when it comes to licensing is really difficult to work with. Mm-hmm. It can feel very much like you are definitely not wanted in this area, and we will do everything we can to make it as difficult as possible for you to operate. And the same with planning and licensing working together. You know, we've done works before where licensing have said, yeah, no, that is definitely going to be fine, and then we get to the planning meeting, oh, no chance. Mm-hmm. You know, from us, from where we're trying to do everything in our powers to make sure that, you know, we are living up to the licence objectives and being responsible retailers, and then to be back down at every step of the way to the point where we do have a venue in Soho that hemorrhages money. And part of that is because of the restrictions on our licensing, as well as, you know, rates increase and rent increase, but it makes it very difficult. And that is a small live music venue, and it's an iconic venue that's not supported. And I think it feels there's a lack of support in terms of licensing in certain areas of the country that definitely have an agenda to eradicate live music venues potentially that have a late night licence.
And so moving that across to agent of change, is that an argument then for putting agent of change on a statutory footing rather than a policy guidance thing? Because then you do get that inconsistency of approach across different devolved areas.
It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because I think, like we said earlier, it's not always one size fits all. I think there's a lack of understanding sometimes of the decisions that are made are not necessarily made by people who actually even know that venue. They've never even stepped foot in that venue. They're all sat behind a desk, actually just making a decision, not actually there.
I can see you're itching to comment on.
Just picking up on your point, I think the UK government was quite clear when they announced the plans on the National Planning Policy Framework that is a very strong document in itself. It's something that the councils themselves are legally bound to comply with. I mean, you still get, obviously, there's still an onus on the councils to then take it forward, but in some ways, I think we've achieved a lot with agent of change, and that shouldn't be kind of forgotten what we have changed there. I think there's certainly things you can do more to kind of strengthen it further. There's one area which is quite interesting, is about culturally significant areas and creating designations. I think actually in Wales, the Welsh government actually committed to that. I don't think the English UK government committed to do that in England. There's certainly been progress in Scotland with the bill that's going through there with something along that line. So having actually that almost zoning, if you like, mechanism to be put into place will kind of take forward that maybe the proposals in the MPPF, and then kind of give it even more oomph within legislation.
And then you'd be preventing different things operating in different parts of the country. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Clive, do you want to go on?
Yeah, thank you. Can you just say what the large venues that you're involved with, and obviously the Albert Hall, do to prevent ticket touting?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I can do. After kind of the recent changes, we have put several measures in place. So we have anti-bot measures on the website. We do ID checks, especially for the high-profile artists, and we work with promoters to do that. We've clarified our terms and conditions and made them easier to find and easier to read. We turn away people who hold secondary tickets, and we've written to the secondary ticket sites as well. We're trialling a company called Neon, which is a verified resale platform at face value, a fan-to-fan platform, because we weren't offering any refunds or exchanges, and so obviously that then pushes people towards people like Viagogo. So we're trialling this platform called Neon now, and they have to check every purchase with us before they then resell it, so that we can actually say that they're legitimate tickets in the first place.
So you were selling your tickets direct to the clients yourself? You weren't going through a Ticketmaster or anyone?
We've got our own box office. Right. Yes.
So Neon are alongside your box office?
They're another independent company which we're just trying on a few shows, actually just about to.
And they're only allowed to sell at face value?
Yes.
And so there's no surcharge on that, or?
I imagine. I don't know I imagine there is a small booking fee, as there would be with anyone.
Like most ticket agents, they do actually have to charge a booking fee. It's a business, otherwise
can vary, depending on the artist on some of those sites. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, but it's not inflated. They won't be inflating the ticket prices. Making them £1,000 each. It's a face value with a booking fee.
Sorry, you were going to say, and I'll come back.
Yeah, I think I was about to say the same thing. It's not, that's kind of a standard measure, obviously being a business, that they do actually have to cover their costs as well, but it wouldn't be a case of, because it's a secondary ticket, because it isn't, that you are bumping the price up to ridiculous measures to actually obviously make a huge profit on that. So it's kind of similar to you, where we have a ticketing site that manages our allocations of tickets, and that's given to legit ticketing agencies, and we have worked really hard with Ed Sheeran's people to actually stop the reselling of tickets and secondary ticket sites.
Yeah, so it's just so I'm clear, the face value of the ticket that's resold is sold as the price on the ticket?
We don't resell, it's sold. So the ticket is sold as the price of the ticket plus a booking fee.
Right,
plus
and
postage.
if it appears on a secondary ticketing site?
We are trying to stamp it out, and the same as every music venue in the country, we're all trying to work together to actually stop that secondary ticket sales by introducing, we're a bit behind the times really, but recently introduced that we now scan our tickets so that it can be reported if they're duplicate or if they have been sold on a secondary site, but it is an ongoing kind of battle.
Right. So what do you do to monitor the secondary ticketing sites then to make sure that you're, as far as you can, that your tickets aren't being resold?
So a section of the company I work for actually look into that more than I do. So I'm no expert in that field, to be honest, but I know that we have done a lot of work working to basically eradicate that.
If you'd identified a ticket that was one of your tickets that was up for resale, at huge markup price on one of the secondary ticketing sites, you would cancel that ticket?
Yeah, the customer would be contacted and that ticket would be cancelled.
Right, okay. And can I just ask, is that the same with the Albert Hall? And do you prevent secondary ticketing sites putting on huge handling fees? Because that's what they can do too. They can sell the ticket for one price but put on a surcharge for handling.
Once those tickets are being sold on a secondary site, we have no control over that. So they can charge whatever they like if the person buying the ticket is willing to pay and they've gone to that site and they're buying a ticket. So we don't have an influence.
You don't monitor that and try to prevent the sale?
We try and cancel tickets if we know, but often what they do is put seats on the numbers on which aren't actually true. We've identified tickets that are being sold with the seat details which aren't actually even seats at the Royal Albert Hall. So we can cancel them when we can identify where the tickets are.
And you do that?
Yes.
Yeah. And so can I ask, you have a system where people own seats?
Yes.
And they can sell them. Is there any regulations that limit the price that they can charge for those seats?
Well, I thought you might ask that. And it is a very complex issue because the seats were sold up to 150 years ago to families or businesses, and they've been passed down in generations. They were sold to raise money to finish the completion of building the hall because there was not enough money, they ran out of money. Now they own those seats, they have property rights over them, and the hall has absolutely no control or influence over those seats, and their rights are protected and enshrined in an Act of Parliament. But however, we do offer a ticket return scheme, so the members can return that if they want to resell they're not reselling them because when they sell their tickets, it's actually selling them on the primary market. They haven't bought those tickets, they bought those seats as property as much as 150 years ago. So if they want to sell their tickets, we offer what's called a ticket return scheme, and a high proportion of them do sell their tickets through our box office, about 60%.
At the same rate that you would sell?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And then 40% either use them, many donate them to charity. We have a process where our promoters or charities can write to those members and ask them to donate their tickets. Many of them do that. Many of them pass them on to families or friends to use, and a very small proportion might choose to sell them in other places.
So we're not talking about large numbers of tickets being sold for massively inflated prices for very popular events?
No.
Right. So that doesn't go on?
No, and I would say again, it's not within the hall's control or influence, those tickets.
Right. And do they contribute, when they do sell those tickets, do they contribute anything back to you say your maintenance costs are 600 million a year, 6 million
6
a
million.
year. Not 600 million, sorry, they want to be a heart attack, but 6 million a year. So do they put anything back into that?
They do, they contribute £5 million a year.
From those seats? Yeah,
from the seat holders contribute that amount. And I'll say again that we don't get any government funding or any funding from anywhere else. We are a charity and we have to act in a commercial way, and it's it's tough. And so they absolutely do contribute.
Right. And do you feel, just one last question on this, about this issue about secondary ticketing. I mean, do you feel that that there's been enough done by other venues to take on these secondary ticketing sites that are making huge profits while you're struggling to run a big iconic venue?
Yeah, I think everyone is doing everything they can, but it's also we need help from people like you, and obviously you're tackling that now. the whole industry has been extremely vocal about secondary ticketing. I don't think there's anyone that has condoned it. So, apart from the people that operate the secondary ticket sites, of course.
I mean, our focus has been very much on trying to ensure that the recent campaigns that have achieved the law changes, that they are actually properly enforced. So that's something that we're very much behind. Also consumer awareness and education, and that ties into the Google point, if you like. I mean, we think it's ridiculous that Viagogo still appears so high in search rankings, etc. And that, given all the problems that are going on there. So I think there's a strong role that Google can play in the way that a trusted brand like that exists and people accessing tickets that way. I think there could be more done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Farrelly.
I'm sorry that I was out, Lucy, when you mentioned, Joe kind of told me, eBack.
Yes.
Could you say a few more words about that?
I feel so passionately about this, and I think...
Be as passionate as you like.
and as does, I'm sure, that anyone who has been involved with the power of music or the music industry, the fact that we are saying that as a for GCSEs you do not have to take a creative subject anymore. Of course, I'm particularly passionate about music. I just find incredibly unbelievable and very disappointing and very saddening, and I think it's detrimental to music. And someone earlier spoke about classical music and how schools only teach classical music, but actually that's not true. We've got instruments that are now endangered because schools aren't teaching, like the harp and the oboe and the bassoon. And I have 2 young daughters. I haven't had one single letter about music in the 3 years they've been at school. I pay for them to have music lessons because I know about music. I went to Royal College of Music. I know the value of it. I went through the system. I played in a youth orchestra and I had lessons paid for me, and it's so worrying that opportunity is not there for young people. And if we don't have people engaging with music, whether it's classical or rock and pop or folk or jazz, how can we even be talking about the grassroots venue, and how can we be talking about people playing at the Royal Albert Hall if music is not being taught in the classrooms?
We went through this very critically in respect of the impact on the creative industries in a previous inquiry, that STEM versus STEAM, as it were. But it seems, just looking at some of the University of Sussex research that's come out, again, in an article in The Guardian today, about the impact on schools, it seems as if the eBack juggernaut is still going on.
Definitely, and I think since 2016 there's been a 15% decrease or decline in people taking GCSE music, and that's a huge amount. We're at the lowest ever the amount of people that are doing music as GCSE, and I can't speak for the other creative subjects, but they don't do any creative subjects. And how has that decision been made that those subjects are not as important as the other, so they call academic subjects? They should be. We know the power of music, how it can help with well-being, teamwork, character building, confidence building, all the fun that you get out of music, the love, the enjoyment. And I just can't believe that decision would be made.
And as far as I'm aware, the intention is to expand this eBack measure to 90% of state secondary school pupils by 2020, with no correction at all so far. So presumably it will just get worse.
It will. I mean, we can see the decline happening, and those A-level results were really interesting today, and it's a huge worry. We desperately need someone to help, or people to help on this, because if these creative subjects are just pushed to the side, everything will change. The whole way that we operate as a country without culture. How many people use culture for enjoyment or just as a part of their everyday being? We support lots of amateur groups at the Royal Albert Hall, lots of school groups playing. Where are all those people going to come from if there's no one studying music anymore?
We're going to discuss this in more depth in a later session, I hope. And I think we want to move on to Brexit in Europe at the moment. But over the summer, if you'll allow me, I lost a great friend, a wonderful lady called Cynthia Leach, who was the wife of my agent David. She was recovering from cancer but didn't make full recovery. She was a teacher and she played the violin, and in one of the last conversations that they were having as a family, it was about the Scallop Wars, or the Scallop Wars, and Cynthia was very unequivocal. I blame Michael Gove, she said, who was the Education Secretary between 2010 and 2014. Apart from blaming Michael Gove, who else should we blame?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know who was involved with making those decisions. All we know is that, I mean, we at the Royal Albert Hall and other major cultural institutions are trying now to give back. So this is why we do an extensive education and outreach programme for music, where we engage 200,000 people. We pay for young people to have instrumental lessons. We invite them in to listen to performances at very low ticket prices, and we're just doing as much as we possibly can to engage young people in music. But Tom
wants to jump in.
I just wanted to add about, I mean, we've launched a report just last month called Securing Our Talent Pipeline, which is very much focused on the factors that, yes, we do have some very strong industry figures. We can present a very good macro picture of what the industry looks like. But there's some real problems at the kind of very, some early 8 stage level of the industry, particularly music and education, particularly around infrastructure, which we're talking about, venues, rehearsal spaces, and around finance. A lot of that is social mobility issues as well. I mean, some of the statistics that we've come up with recently, 17% of music creators went to independent or private schools, nothing wrong with that at all, but compared to the rest of the population, it's 7%. So there's the disparity there. Also, there's something like 46% of people are doing, music creators have some form of financial help from friends and family. So we don't want the music industry to become the preserve bank of mum and dad. There is a government. The government is supposed to be looking into a new national plan for music education. I think the new one expires in 2020. There isn't a commitment yet to take forward that from government. So in other areas such as Ofsted, I think to actually have a real broad, balanced educational experience, you shouldn't be able to be awarding an outstanding achievement if you don't have some kind of creative learning aspect. And we feel very strongly that you should have it from a very early age. Creative learning should be at the early age, at maybe your children's age, going onwards. And I think that's key.
And you've let us have that report, have you?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. If I could ask about Brexit. I mean, the committee produced a report earlier in the year on the impact of Brexit on the creative sector, and one of the issues we looked at then in particular was visa rights for performing artists, and particularly to understand that with music venues in particular, you may need to bring people in at very short notice, and you need flexibility in the system to do that. Obviously, this is not an area of negotiation with the EU; it's a matter of national competence. So it's a question of redesign the rules of who comes into the country, and the government publishes and introduces its immigration bill in due course. But I'd be quite interested to know, from your perspective, what engagement you've had with the government on this so far. Do you feel this is moving in the right direction? Do you have any ongoing concerns about the ability for the artists performing at your venues to be able to bring the people in they need to bring in to make their events a success?
And we've had quite a lot of engagement with government on this general issue. We met with the Migration Advisory Committee. We submitted to their consultation. They had somebody working on creative industries, but their recent report didn't have anything particular on the creative industry at all, which was actually very disappointing, because I think there are some very unique challenges and experiences that the music industry faces, and the creative industry as a whole. So I think we were slightly disappointed, or to say the least, on that, the outcome of the fact that are maybe very particular issues, like you say, in terms of actually getting people to come to the UK to perform, that wasn't acknowledged in the way it could. I mean, I think with Brexit, we've always been arguing for a reciprocal approach as well, because we want people to continue to perform and be an open country in that way. We also need to be able to travel around Europe as well. Free movement has been key to us. We've been talking about the idea of some kind of visa passporting arrangement that could be put in place, because at the moment it's very easy for a band to do a gig in Amsterdam and then do the next night in Paris. After the 29th of March, that might be not so easy, and so that is something where we want to be open and allow people to come in and continue to perform, but we do have to accept that again, a key driver to the great economic performance of the industry is to have the ability to perform overseas too.
Just Lucy, Michele, I mean, is this some from the artists that perform at your venues? Have you had any concerns from them about Brexit? Do you have any concerns about this at the moment?
I suppose with again, I don't book bands. I'm an operator, but from what I understand is, again, it's just adding more risk to actually putting that show on. So the cost of actually getting that artist to be able to tour round Europe, including the UK, is just another add to that kind of gamble in a way, where we could end up with quite a stagnant live music industry, where actually you'll only get pretty much guaranteed sellouts that are actually going to opt to play in larger venues, and then the same kind of knock-on effect to the smaller venues as well.
Yeah.
I think as far as we're concerned, I mean, we're taking reservations as much as 3 years out, and we're very booked up in the next 2 years. So the market is very buoyant. We're still in high demand. I'm about to take over as a chair for the National Arenas Association. We also represent 23 of the arenas. So I asked them this question, and they've all come back and saying they're not really seeing a massive change. They've still got all the artists booking in, so they're not particularly worried. I think if due to Brexit there was a massive kind of economic downturn, those venues that rely on any subsidies from the Arts Council or local authority funding or even sponsorship, if there is an economic downturn, then you could argue that their financial models could be impacted. But actually, largely, they're kind of okay about it at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go, final question for me. I just wanted to go back on the line of questioning on secondary ticketing. And just to ask Lucy, with regards to the Albert Hall, I understand the position that you set out and set it out very clearly. What does the hall do if an artist has stated that it doesn't want any of the tickets for the performance to be sold on secondary ticketing sites? Do you have an obligation in the contract you enter into with the artist to monitor what the debenture holders at the Albert Hall do with their tickets?
We don't, because they're just not within our control at all. They're not in our manifest. There's something completely separate. We don't have any control or influence. And actually, they regard that as a primary sale because they haven't bought them in the first place. They own those seats as property rights.
So ultimately, if they decide to put it on Viagogo and sell it there, there's nothing anyone can do about it?
Yeah, as I said, it's out of our control. So. Yeah.
What proportion of the seats at the Albert Hall are owned by the debenture holders?
It's about, I think it's 1,270.
Okay, so what's that about? What's the?
It's we're out of 5,500. So yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay. And for when major artists come, if they put that stipulation in place, they don't want tickets resold, do they just have to understand that that you can only have control over the tickets that you sell and not the ones that you don't sell?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from Joe?
On the Brexit stuff, you mentioned, Lucy, about the venues,
yes,
and they are booking. You've got stuff booked ahead, and they don't think that there is an issue at the moment. But I suppose, would you agree that? So, for example, orchestras looking to tour, it's more about the musicians, really, in terms of not having that uncertainty about what things are going to look like after the 29th of March next year.
Yeah, that is one thing I would have added, is that, with conservatoires, I think Trinity had put some evidence in to say 20% of their students are from the EU. Mm-hmm. Many of the soloists and conductors we hire for orchestras are European, and it will restrict the movement, perhaps. Also, it could restrict the quality and the diversity and artistic development. So I do think actually classical music could be an area where it possibly might impact. But, as we all say, until it actually happens, it's difficult to say.
Mm-hmm. Fine, thank you.
That's great.
Paul, just to Tom, I don't know whether you were involved in the organisation of this, but I think it was over the weekend. Bob Geldof was certainly concerned, with a lot of other names coming in behind him, about the potential impact on the industry of Brexit. So how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't directly involved in that. That was actually very much a Bob Geldof-led initiative. I mean, but I said there is a. I think there's kind of the way the industry views Brexit. There's three areas I would say in particular. There's the issue around legislation, copyright. There's a concern, obviously, that once we leave, that could be lose protections that we have in existing EU laws, because that has a very strong backdrop. Second to that, you've got the tariff implications that may come up and the delays on physical products such as CDs, DVDs, etc. They're actually at zero rate, so that probably won't change. However, musical instruments and some degree of recording equipment will have tariffs associated with it. So that will be a potential problem. So it's really the big concern is around overall is what we would consider to be the non-tariff barriers, which is freedom of movement changing, being much more harder to tour. One of our biggest and key markets, where there's a huge appetite for music content as a whole, and then associated with that, there's then potentially restrictions on goods as well, such as merchandise, a potential carnet system coming in, and if, in fact it really probably will greatly affect the smaller up-and-coming artists, those people who are actually trying to work with to improve their setup in the UK with venues. But if they can't then tour very easily across the EU, then that's going to put significant barriers into their ability to grow their careers too.
Okay, thank you. Chair, if that was Sir Bob's own initiative, perhaps we could invite him.
Yeah,
we don't sit on Mondays.
You can make an exception. But yes, we can find out more about that. If there are no other questions, thank you very much for your evidence this afternoon.